Hi, do you know what bullying is? Have you ever been bullied by your classmates, or were you the star of the school? Some kids manage to survive these difficult times. Their parents transferred them to other schools, moved to another city, or they were just lucky and the bullying ended. Their psyche perhaps was strong enough to survive it and move on with their lives. But what if the teenager never managed to overcome bullying? What if what happened at school becomes an obsession for him and thoughts of revenge become the meaning of life? I'll tell you, listen. His name was Brian Holt, an ordinary name like the life he was born into. A small town in Indiana, drowning in the routine of gray houses, fences, and other people's glances. His family, his mother worked as a nurse on night shifts, and his father, fired from the auto plant, was always looking for himself in a bottle and useless repairs in the backyard. Brian had no brothers or sisters, and perhaps that's why he learned so quickly that in the world you are on your own. At school, he was invisible, not in a bad way. He just didn't fit into any circles. Not the American football team, where loud-voiced guys with muscles bulging from steroids discussed who they slept with on the weekend. Not the debate club, where elitist arrogance and sarcastic smirks reigned. He stayed away, and this was his first sin in the eyes of others. Children sense weakness the way predators sense blood. And Brian, with his soft voice, thick glasses, and eternal interest in chemistry and physics, was an easy target. He came to class with a neatly packed backpack, notebooks and covers, covered with formulas and diagrams, and in response received whispers, laughter, and sometimes open mockery. "Look, the professor is coming," someone from the back row would shout as he passed through the hallway. "He must have come to fuck the periodic table again." Others would laugh. The girls were especially cruel. Those cheerleaders who shone at school games and wore so much makeup that they could compete with the windows of beauty stores. Ashley, Samantha, Brooke. Their faces were equally beautiful and cruel. They didn't just tease Brian. They turned his existence into a theater of humiliation. One day, when he was 16, Samantha ran up to him in the cafeteria and poured a chocolate milkshake on him, accusing him of looking at her like a pervert. The entire cafeteria burst into laughter. Brian stood up silently, gathered his books, wiped his face with his sleeve, and left. He didn't cry. He didn't cry anymore. Tears were a weakness, and he learned to suppress them, just as he taught himself to suppress everything else. He started to keep to himself. He would disappear into the library, immerse himself in books, experiments. He had two friends like him, Michael and Jeremy. They understood because they were like him, but even with them, Brian kept his distance. Something in him was getting colder, heavier every day. He started working out. He installed a bench in the basement, bought old dumbbells second-hand, and did exercises every day, as if on schedule. No one saw it. No one knew that behind those glass lenses of his glasses were eyes full of hatred and a thirst for justice, which had never happened in his life, not even once. His diary was the only one he trusted. It contained not only formulas and chemistry notes, but also names. Each name was not just a former classmate, but an act of violence, an episode of pain. Brian recorded every incident, who, when, how. He did not shout about it, he collected. After graduation, he was accepted to a college in a neighboring town. He hoped that it would all be behind him, that the new environment would give him a chance to forget. But the wounds were too deep, and the images from the past were too vivid. And although here they no longer hit him, spat in his food, or knocked over his tray in the cafeteria, he could still feel their shadows. They were in every look, in every dismissive chuckle behind his back. He had grown accustomed to living in this. By the age of 20, his body had changed. Hard training had turned him into a strong guy, with a bearing and strength that he had never had before. His glasses had been replaced by contact lenses, but inside nothing had changed. There was still the same Brian Holt, the boy who had been trampled, who had been walked on, and who had once sworn that everything would change. And then one day, he learned that his former classmates were getting together again. Summer camp, a trip to the lake, like every year. Another high school reunion. They would be there, Samantha, Ashley, John, Brett. Those whose names were circled in red in his diary. He wouldn't go there, of course not. He had completely different plans for them, and he already knew how their meeting would end and where it would happen. He had found the perfect place, an old abandoned house in the woods, with a basement and a rusty lock. In his head, the plan was taking shape. No longer a fantasy, no longer a dream. This was reality, and his revenge would be as cold as the years he had spent alone, as dark as the scars on his soul, and as inevitable as the pain they had once caused him. It was a completely ordinary summer day. Brian had stopped at the supermarket to buy household items: duct tape, clamps, brushes, a can of gasoline. Everything that at first glance seemed disjointed and random was in fact part of a carefully constructed plan. He was standing at the checkout when he heard a familiar shrill laugh behind him. Turning around, I saw them, Samantha and Ashley. The same faces, only now with even bigger lips and an even thicker layer of foundation. Dressed as if they were going to a photo shoot, not shopping. Short shorts, tight t-shirts, high heels. They didn't notice him right away, but when they did, it was the same. "Oh my God, is that you?" Samantha raised her eyebrows. "Holt, are you out of your dungeon?" Ashley laughed. "And still weird. What do you have? Duct tape and gasoline. God, I hope you're not going to blow us up." At that moment, Samantha accidentally pushed Ashley's hand with hot coffee, and the cup tipped right onto his t-shirt. The liquid burned his skin. Brian clenched his jaw, and they laughed, loudly, openly, as if they were back in school. He silently left the store. This was the last signal, the point of no return. They had not changed. They did not realize their past mistakes, and now they would feel everything he felt, but 10 times stronger. The abandoned house stood off the main road, deep in the forest, hidden by thick tree crowns. An old 2-story building with rotten steps, torn shutters, and cracked plaster. A narrow staircase led to the basement. Rarely anyone looked here, too far, too creepy and gloomy. But for Brian, this place became a temple of his revenge. He cleared the basement, installed reinforced fastenings on the walls. From scrap metal and parts ordered online, he assembled a semblance of an electric chair. Wires distributed across the floor led to the generator. The couch on which workers may have previously slept was now covered with new black fabric and equipped with strong belts. He thought of everything down to the smallest detail. Cameras in the corners to record everything. Even the signal did not go outside, since the basement was shielded. On the shelves there were vials with chemicals, syringes, knives, scalpels, and other things. This was not just an act of violence. This was retribution. He chose Ashley first. She was less popular than Samantha, but her taunts were the most poisonous. He found out on social media that she had already arrived in town and would be at John's party. He wrote to her on a fake account as if she were an old friend, inviting her to a supposedly secret alumni meeting, for our own people only, as he wrote, in an old house in the woods where we used to have get-togethers. She didn't ask any unnecessary questions because she was too stupid and naive. She would definitely come because, as before, she thought that the whole world was her toy and revolved around her. He didn't sleep the night before the meeting. He checked the equipment, sharpened the blades, wiped the camera lenses, dressed in dark clothes, secured the mask to his face. His heart beat steadily, without hesitation. Brian felt no fear, only sweet anticipation. As the tires crunched on the gravel, he hid behind the basement door. Ashley got out of the car, phone in hand, and looked around nervously. "Who's there? John, is that you, idiot?" He stepped forward out of the darkness. Before she could say anything, he suddenly hit her with the stun gun. Her body jerked and went limp. Brian grabbed her and dragged her down the creaking stairs, into the basement, which smelled of iron and dust. The mechanism was ready. The belts were tightened. The cameras were turned on. She came to herself, already strapped in. And for the first time in years, Brian saw in her eyes not contempt, not mockery, but real animal fear. And that was only the beginning. Ashley groaned. Consciousness slowly returned. The light from the lamps flickered above her, casting ominous shadows on the cracked walls of the basement. She was tied to a couch, leather straps tightly pulling her wrists, ankles and chest, not allowing her to even move. The hum of a generator was heard nearby, and the air was filled with the sharp smell of metal and burning. "Woke up!" A voice rang out, slightly hoarse but calm. Ashley panicked, tears slowly rolling down the thick layer of makeup on her face. "Who are you? What is this place? Please, let me go. I won't tell anyone." He came out of the darkness, without a mask, with a face she knew but didn't recognize. Brian Holt. Only now there was not a drop of the fear or confusion in his eyes that she remembered. There was only emptiness and hatred. "Do you remember how you spilled coffee on me?" he asked quietly, coming closer. "What? What are you talking about?" She was choking in a panic attack. "It was just a stupid joke. I didn't mean to. Please untie me." He picked up a metal teapot with a short spout, removed the lid, and thick steam poured out. "Do you know how long a third-degree burn lasts on the skin?" He leaned over her, and she suddenly screamed, "No, no, no." The boiling water poured onto her chest. The skin instantly turned red, blistered, and Ashley's scream shook the basement like a hammer blow. She thrashed in her restraints, her eyes bloodshot, and her mouth tore apart in silent agony. "This is for February. Remember the cafeteria. You called me a human diaper and splashed freshly brewed coffee on me," he said coldly, with a barely visible smirk on his face. He repeated the procedure, on her stomach and then on her legs. Ashley screamed as she probably never did in her life. The skin sizzled and steam filled the room. She begged, cried, promised anything, called names, tried to remember every moment when she was even a little kind, but Brian just looked at her, quietly, without anger. It was technical, like an experiment. "You won't die tonight," he finally said. "We're going to have a show, for everyone. You're just the beginning. You'll be the first one to open the homecoming party." He went upstairs, leaving her tied up, half dead, her skin sticky from burns, her top torn. The camera on the tripod recorded her every move, her every scream. Upstairs, he unlocked her phone. The password was simple. It's amazing how easily people open up when they think they're safe. Selfies, empty messages, photos in a bathing suit. None of that matters. The main thing is the contact list. John, Samantha, Brett. He started texting. "Hey guys, I found an awesome place for a party. An abandoned house in the woods, like in horror movies. Just don't tell anyone. I want to surprise you. Come over tonight. It'll be awesome. Here are the coordinates." The messages went away. He had time. He knew they would come. Out of curiosity. Out of boredom. Out of disdain for anything that seemed weird and creepy. And they would each get theirs. When Brian returned to the basement, Ashley was still breathing, wheezing and crying. He leaned down to her ear. "You know what's most interesting? This isn't even the beginning. It's just a prelude. You'll see it all for yourself soon." He straightened up, turned off the light, and left, leaving her in complete darkness. The others will be here soon, and then the real show will begin. The next day, in the evening, Brian was waiting for the guests to arrive. The car turned the corner slowly, with the rustle of tires on gravel. John was the first to get out, tall, athletic, with the same grin on his face that he had in high school. Behind him was Brett, a little overweight, but still in his style. A backwards hat and a t-shirt with the college logo. Samantha was the last one out, looking like she stepped out of an advertising poster. False eyelashes, a short skirt, and her usual self-confidence in every step. "Where is everyone?" John chuckled. "No music, no lights. Looks like Ashley has messed up again." "Yeah, she always had a weird sense of humor." Samantha grinned. "Let's go inside. Maybe she's hiding." They didn't notice the shadows in the trees. Brian waited. He immobilized Brett first, very quietly and unnoticed. A taser to the neck, and the massive body fell silently back, right into his arms, barely groaning. Then, John. He crept up on him from the side, from behind a tree, and hit him twice. The electricity washed over him, and he lost consciousness. Only Samantha managed to notice something, turned around and screamed, "What the—" But Brian was already there. Her scream was cut off when he poked her in the side with the lightning rod. She went limp. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and darkness fell. The basement was filled with bodies. It smelled of sweat, blood, burns, and fear. Ashley was still lying on the couch, but now there were 3 more people next to her. John chained to the electric chair, leather straps around his wrists and ankles. Brett with his arms stretched out to the sides, in steel shackles attached to the concrete wall. It looked like a crucifixion. Samantha was tied to a slanted board, set at an angle so that her head hung slightly down. Her hair fell like a waterfall, and her face was turned into the darkness. Brian turned on the light. Dim, flickering, the metal gleamed. The old lamps hummed a little and made a characteristic sound. Everyone slowly came to their senses. Samantha was the first to moan. "What? Where am I?" she stammered. "Help, someone." "Hi, Samantha," Brian said, stepping out of the shadows. "Your skin is still as flawless as ever. I hope you won't be sad to lose it." She tried to scream, but her mouth was immediately covered with an alcohol-soaked gag. Her eyes filled with horror. John, waking up, shook in his chair. "You bitch, let us go." "What the hell are you doing?" "I'm just putting everything in its place," Brian answered calmly. "John, do you remember how you held my hands and Brett hit my knees in the locker room?" "It was a joke, idiot." "I didn't find it funny." He walked over to the console and flicked the switch. The current ran through the electrodes. John's body jerked, his muscles tensed, and he screamed. Saliva began to flow from his mouth. That was the first wave. "A light one," Brian said. "Now here's the second one." He turned up the voltage. John screamed even louder, his legs twitching in the straps as if he were convulsing. Turning to Brett, Brian came closer. He was no longer holding back his emotions and tears. "Dude, please, forgive us. We were just idiots. It wasn't serious, just for fun. We didn't know you found it so unpleasant. You broke my nose in the 8th grade. For fun. And then you said I ran into the closet myself. Do you really think it's just unpleasant? Let's find out. Brian took out the pliers. Slowly, very slowly, he approached Brett's little finger. The fingers were shaking, the flesh was cracking, the scream was inhuman. Then, the next finger. Well, how is it? Are you having as much fun now? Samantha was twitching on the board. Brian approached her. And you, remember how you once made me beg for forgiveness on my knees in front of the entire school for peeping, even though I was just standing by the window? She shook her head. Blood poured down her face. He cut the fabric of her t-shirt. Her bare chest trembled with fear. Don't be afraid, I'm not a rapist. But now you will understand what real pain is. He pulled out a box of needles and began to stick one after another in her chest, stomach, arms. Each injection was accompanied by her screams and convulsions. You all love a show, so here's a show for you. The most exciting thing in your worthless life, where you are the stars. The basement was full of groans, the smell of burnt flesh, blood, and screams. Brian walked away. All three, Samantha, John, Brett, were alive, half alive. He looked at them with empty eyes. This is not the end. I want you to feel every second. Tomorrow will be the finale. Tomorrow you will know what real despair means. He turned off the light, and darkness fell again. The darkness in the basement was thick and viscous like tar. Only rare groans and hoarse breathing broke the silence. Brian left for a couple of hours, and in this eerie silence, amidst pain and horror, the victims began to whisper among themselves. He's crazy, Brett whispered, swallowing blood. A complete scumbag. We have to get out of here, John muttered, barely audible. Any ideas? My hands. I can't feel them. Samantha's lips were barely moving. That bastard riddled me with needles. If we get his keys, maybe we'll have a chance. Ashley coughed up blood. He wears them on his belt. There was silence all around. No footsteps, no sound from above. Only Hope, which was gone from this room. Hope was the first to go. When Brian returned, the darkness parted before him, as if the night itself respected him. How are you? He grinned. Had a chat? I hope you said goodbye to each other. He stood in the center of the basement, looking around at everyone. He was wearing a black robe, a thick mask on his face with slits for the eyes. In his hand was a remote control for the speakers. He pressed a button and classical music began to play from the speakers. Something majestic. It was all the sarcasm and madness. He spread his arms out like a conductor in front of an orchestra. The music grew, and with it, his euphoria. He felt like a god, a judge and executioner. You know how wrong you were, all of you. You thought that I was nobody, a jester, an outcast, a spineless creature who is not worthy of even your gaze. But this was your biggest mistake. Thanks to this, I became who I was supposed to be. A judge, retribution, pain that you will never forget. He went up to Ashley. She wasn't screaming anymore. She was just sobbing. Remember? The first coffee was in the 8th, the second in the 9th. Then the accidental, boiling water in the dining room. Today will be the final. He took the kettle. Steam was pouring out. Ashley wheezed, thrashed, but the belts wouldn't let it. Boiling water poured onto her chest again. She screamed so loudly that the basement rang from her screams. Another portion on her face. The skin swelled, burst. She was choking with pain. The third wave was on her legs and feet. The skin seemed to hiss, but that was not all. Brian took another kettle. Ashley was wheezing, barely showing signs of life and consciousness. The others were screaming and interrupting each other, trying to stop him, but he enjoyed and listened only to the voice of his inner satisfaction. Then he opened her mouth and slowly poured boiling water from the kettle inside. Ashley's body jerked one last time and froze. Brian, with a blissful smile on his face, exhaled. "The first one is over." He turned around and walked up to John. "Athlete of the year, the school's star. And now who? A wet rag, that's all." He turned on the current. John jerked, again and again. His eyes rolled back in his head, and his body shook uncontrollably. "Don't die yet. Just a second." Brian splashed a bucket of water in John's face. "Now, let's go. I beg you, I beg you." "Don't do this," John screamed in despair, but it was all in vain. The current hit so hard that John bent over. A dying scream burst from his mouth. His skin began to smoke, his muscles trembled, and foam slowly flowed from his mouth. The last jerk, and the body went limp. Heavy smoke began to pour out from under the belts. "The second one is ready," Brian said, not hiding his pleasure. Next was Brett. He looked at Brian with horror. "No, please. You were a dull piece of meat. Now you will become just meat." The hammer dug into his elbow. Crunch, scream. The next blow was to the knee, and then to the other arm. It crushed the joints one by one. Brett's body was just a set of brittle links. He screamed until he was deafeningly hoarse. "Did you think that I forgot all the blows you gave me to my legs, shoulders? How you, every time you passed by, did not miss the opportunity to touch me, push me in the back or shoulder, trip me, and burst out laughing, looking at me lying on the floor with torn knees and a scuffed face. I could not sleep normally for days after that. But you did not care. Now you know what it was like for me." Brian picked up the crowbar, swung it, and drove it straight into Brett's chest. The rib cage crunched like a potato chip, and the metal rod went right through. Brett, his eyes wild with fear, wheezed, and a thick stream of blood flowed from his mouth. He died, and Brian lifted his chin with indescribable joy as the life disappeared from his eyes. And finally, Samantha. He left her for dessert, like a cherry on the cake. "Oh, you are my star, eternal beauty. You always called me ugly, a monster in glasses. But that was then, and now I want to play beautician with you. After all, you love beauty so much." He pulled out the pliers. One by one, the nails. Samantha squealed like a wounded, cornered animal. Then Brian took out the scalpel. He began to slowly cut off her eyelashes and eyebrows along with the skin. "It's much more beautiful this way, don't you think?" he said sarcastically and continued. He cut off her lips. Blood spurted in all directions. But he couldn't stop. Brian cut the skin off her face like a film. The scalp with hair smooth as silk was the last. She was losing consciousness. Her disfigured and blood-soaked body hardly resembled anything alive. It looked like the carcass of an animal, mutilated, torn to pieces by beasts. He splashed ammonia on her. Then he hit her several times on the cheeks. "Don't sleep, you can't sleep, you are my end." And when she barely managed to open what was left of her eyes, he took a nail file. Brian sharpened it so that the edge was as sharp as a razor blade. He took a deep breath, smiled, and exhaled, cutting her throat. Blood spurted out. He stood there, watching her life slip through his fingers and trickle down to the floor. The music was still playing. "End of Act 1, he whispered, and darkness fell upon the basement again. Brian lay on the cold concrete basement floor. Bodies were all around him, dead, charred, mutilated, his former executioners, now victims. Blood ran down the tiles, the walls, and collected in thick puddles. It had long since cooled, but to him it was warm as a bath. He spread his arms, spread out like a child in the snow, and ran his palms through the dark, sticky liquid. The smile never left his face. He closed his eyes. Every moment here among the remains was heaven for him. For him it was a kind of orgasm, only not for the body, but for the soul. He rolled on the floor as if in hysterics, saturated with adrenaline and the pain of someone else's flesh. For the first time in his life, Brian was truly happy. He stood up, breathing heavily, and looked around again. The thick steam rising above the corpses made the picture unreal, as if from another world. This was the end of the show, the finale, and now he had to clean up. He took off his bloody clothes and changed into clean ones. He changed everything, from his boots to his underwear. He put everything he had before in a bag, doused it with gasoline, and threw it to the corpses. Then he got to work. One canister, then a second, a third. He doused the walls, the floor, the bodies. Every surface, down to the last crack. Even the lamps on the ceiling. When he got outside, the floor was covered in a gasoline film. He took a few steps back and repeated the process outside. The old house drank blood and now thirsted for fire. The last canister went onto the porch and the creaking steps. He took out a matchbox. The last note trembled in his hand. The last stroke. For everything, he whispered and struck a match. The flame shot up. He threw the match onto the porch. The house caught fire instantly, as if it had been waiting. The hell inside had opened up and was now screaming at the sky. The fire was devouring the walls, hissing as if Brett, Samantha, John, and Ashley were still trying to get out. Brian didn't turn around. He was walking to the car, the same one they had arrived in. He got behind the wheel, turned on the headlights. His eyes reflected the crimson flames, and Brian was gone. He drove for a long time, more than 300 kilometers without stopping. The night was black. The forest gave way to hills. The road seemed endless. And finally, a lake. A deep one. Death, surrounded by fog. He got out, fixed a wedge on the gas pedal and put a brick. Started the engine, leaving the door open. The car moved and with a roar went into the water, plunging into darkness. Foam, a bubble, and everything disappeared. He was left on the shore, alone. He sat down on a rock and took out his tablet. There were recordings on the screen, all the pain, all the pleas, all the screams. He rewound, paused, listened to the screams as if they were music, his personal concert of revenge. He enjoyed it. His body trembled with delight. He watched over and over again how John shook in the current, how Ashley burned in agony, how Samantha bled out. At some point, he felt, not fear, number not guilt. It was something else, a click, a gap, a shadow in his head. Wait, he whispered. He rewound the recording, looked at the faces, listened, recounted. Someone is missing. He looked up abruptly. The lake was still, and there was silence all around. Brian stood up. His gaze became heavy. Something shifted inside. I missed something. And from that moment on, a new chapter in his book of revenge began. But that's another story. Don't forget that it's up to you whether this story gets a second life. The one that gets the most likes and views will find its continuation with an equally creepy and terrible development of events. It all depends on you. Thank you for being with us.